I'm the faculty director of the Ed Portal, and I'm really happy that you all braved the high snowbanks to make it in tonight. I think it's going to be well worth it. Because what's exciting about the talk we're going to hear tonight is that it's an opportunity for us to see how we can understand living things from a variety of different perspectives. I'm sure that many of you have looked at birds, squirrels, things that crawl around and find them really interesting. You're interested in how they move. You're interested in how they live. But what's also very interesting is trying to understand them as physical things. How does movement happen? How do they work in terms of mechanics? And increasingly in science, that's something we're all very interested in. How do you take the viewpoint that a biologist has? How do you take the viewpoint that a physicist has? How do you take the viewpoint that an engineer has? Bring them all together and try to understand living things, but also by understanding living things, take that somewhere else and try to build things that work in ways that are particularly effective, particularly exciting, based on what we learn from studying ourselves, from studying other kinds of animals and other kinds of organisms. So this is something that Harvard's very interested in. So there are a number of places at Harvard that in some ways very much attempt to focus on aspects of these questions, of which, for example, the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering is one such entity. So what's nice about the talk we'll hear about tonight is that it really represents sort of a bridge from the life sciences or the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, also life sciences outreach, research at the Harvard Microbiotics Laboratory, and the Wyss Institute. And so what I'd like to do first is to kindly introduce Tara Bennett, who is our program manager for life sciences outreach. And Tara who is an accomplished award-winning high school teacher, also oversees the outreach programs in the life sciences and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And it was Tara that really built the connection with Ben that we'll be hearing from this evening that allowed us to bring this sort of cross-Harvard collaboration to the Ed Portal for you. So thank you, and please join me in greeting Tara.
I'd also like to welcome you here tonight, and as Rob mentioned, I became acquainted with Ben's work, and given the enthusiasm and interest that we found students coming to the portal had in robots and robotics, I decided to contact Ben and find out if he'd be willing to come here. And I was fortunate enough back in the fall to attend one of his lectures, and it just seemed like the perfect way to introduce students here and the community to the work that's happening at Harvard in this very exciting area. Ben is a fourth-year graduate student in the lab of Dr. Rob Wood, and I think tonight you'll be very excited to hear about these types of robots. There are some incredibly surprising things that they're doing with them, and this is all part of a larger focus that we'll be having on robots. We showed WALL-E, the movie, a couple of weeks ago, and in some of our science clubs this coming fall and our mentoring program, we're going to be building some robots and doing some engineering projects. So please join me in welcoming, Ben Finio.
I think you guys might have actually done a better job explaining some of this than I will, so thanks for that. Yes, again, I'm Ben Finio. I'm a fourth-year graduate student in the Harvard Microbiotics Lab, which is closely affiliated with the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about my research, and not just my research, but my lab's research in biologically inspired microrobots. So I'm going to start out by explaining what that phrase actually means, because it's a bit of a mouthful. And I guess before I start, I'm happy to answer questions at any time. I hate it when people just talk at me for an hour, so if I say something that doesn't make sense, or you're really curious about something I just said or something up on the screen, please just raise your hand and I'll do my best to answer. You don't have to hold your questions until the end. But starting off, what is bioinspired robotics? I'm going to break it up into two halves, the bioinspired and the micro part. Bioinspired robotics is not the same thing as biorobotics. There's a lot of buzzwords here that people get confused sometimes. Biorobotics means more artificial limbs, artificial organs that can get implanted inside the human body. That's different than biologically inspired robotics, where we usually take an idea from nature, particularly an animal, and then try to build a robot that moves in the same way. So there are a lot of examples of big bio-inspired robots out there. There's things like bat robots. This dog robot is built by a company in Boston called Boston Dynamics. There's a pretty cool YouTube video of this guy walking around. It can balance itself very well. Somebody kicks it really hard. It doesn't fall over. So when you get home, go on YouTube and look up Big Dog if you want to see that movie. There's swimming robots. Robo-Tuna was built at MIT, also right here in Boston. But these guys are all really big. I don't know if you've ever seen a live tuna or a Great Dane, but they're pretty large animals. So what we do is micro-robotics. And this is kind of misleading. How many of you have learned your metric prefixes in school so far? Micro, nano, milli, centa? A couple? Okay, so micro, usually you think microscope, microscopic, really tiny. That's actually kind of misleading because micro robots don't actually have to be microscopic. Somebody kind of figured out at some point that if you put micro in front of it, it sounds cooler and you'll get more funding. That's not necessarily physical reality, just call it tiny. So here are some examples of other micro robots. We didn't build these in our lab. These are just kind of pictures of work other people have done where you have a tiny robot, much smaller than that tuna, that fits in the palm of your hand or maybe about the size of a quarter or an inch on a ruler. But notice these guys don't look like animals, right? This one kind of looks like a helicopter. These guys have little tank treads and gears and wheels or something. So what we do is take these two things and put them together, bio-inspired micro-robots, not microbiotics. Sorry, Ron, I think you said that at the beginning. People tend to match the words together. Bio-inspired micro-robotics, separate words, don't cram them together like that. So we do a bunch of different projects that I'm going to talk to you about. Our first one that my lab started out doing is a fly or bee robot. We've expanded to do crawling robots and squishy robots as well. So I'll talk in a lot more detail about all of those and show you cool videos of them doing stuff. There's just some bigger pictures. But first, before I get into that, I might explain why. Some people think, okay, that's cool, but why do you need tiny flying robots or tiny cockroach robots or something crazy? So before I explain it, can anybody guess? Sure. Did you cheat and watch my video on YouTube before or something? Because you got it exactly right. Good job. So for those of you who didn't hear, she said if there's a tiny place, you can send the robot into that tiny place and look around or do whatever you need to do when you fit into that tiny little area. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let's see. Any other guesses? Sure.
Like for medical reasons?
For medical reasons, yeah, we get that question a lot. There are people doing research on building robots. Say they could do something like go down into your body and do surgery on a cancer cell and other stuff, surgery in the intestinal tract, that kind of thing. Our particular robots are a little too large for that. Like our flying robot would be too big to, say, swallow and then have it go down through your intestines. But there are other labs, I'm not sure about at Harvard, but definitely around the world doing medical robotics research like that. So I'll take one more guess and I'll keep going. Sure.
Jobs that are like too small and too humans can't.
That's, yeah, another good one. So not just humans, but real-life robots. So you guys, how many of you saw WALL-E a few weeks ago? I think you said you showed it here. Right, so unfortunately, I hate to break this to you guys, but WALL-E isn't real, right? WALL-E's a movie. Sorry, I know. WALL-E isn't real life. And real-life robots tend to be a lot less exciting than WALL-E. For example, does anybody know what this is?
Oh, yeah.
Right, so this is a Roomba. It's made by a company called iRobot that's also pretty close. I think it's a few miles north of Boston. And it's a robot vacuum cleaner. It's about the size of a dinner plate. You turn it on, it goes around and sucks up dirt on your floor. But it doesn't fly, it doesn't talk, it doesn't have personality. You can't do any of the cool stuff WALL-E or Optimus Prime or the Terminator or, I don't know, think of another movie with robots can do. And when it comes to moving around and doing kind of nimble things that, say, people or robots can't do, there's a lot of stuff it can't do. For example, it can't even go upstairs. It can fall downstairs. It can't go back up the stairs. It can't do something as simple as open a door. It doesn't have arms. And then if you take it outside, you can imagine taking that Roomba and, say, plopping it down right here and telling it to get across the stream. That's not going to go very well. So as an engineer, let's say, okay, we want to build robots that are tiny and can do something like maybe fit through a little crack in the wall, and you kind of need to be flexible and maneuverable to get through there. I have to figure out, okay, how are we going to build a robot that can do that? And rather than starting with a blank slate, and this is what Ron kind of talked about at the beginning, we look to nature and say, okay, what in nature can do that? Why don't we, figure out how things that have been doing this for thousands or millions of years are really good at it, and then build a machine that can do the same thing. And then maybe we can actually do something useful with the robots, like go down in a tiny little confined space and look for people that are trapped after an earthquake. I think these pictures are from the earthquake in Haiti a year ago. Did you guys read about that in the news? And then after that, I think there were several pretty high-profile mine collapses where miners were trapped underground and there were toxic gases, so rescue workers couldn't get them, but maybe you could send a robot down there because robots don't have to breathe, so the toxic gas isn't a problem. So there's actually useful stuff we can do with the robots, not just kind of go down there and look around for the heck of it. And when we look at nature and say, okay, what's good at doing stuff like that? The answer is insects, right? They're tiny, they're nimble, they can fit down in little cracks. They can fly, they can crawl, they can squirm, they can do all that stuff that you guys were talking about. So my job as an engineer is to figure out how are we going to get from there to there. We have to work with biologists who study how the real insects work, and then figure out how to build a robot that can move the same way, be it flying or crawling or squishing or whatever. So the first question we have to answer is how are you actually going to build something that tiny? Engineers have been good at building really big, complicated machines for hundreds of years now. You have this big railroad engine with hundreds or probably thousands of metal moving parts. We can build big flying things. One of the things people ask us pretty frequently is, why don't you just build a really tiny airplane? And that question makes sense at first, but we run into a problem when we try to take big machines and make them really small. So here's the problem. Anybody get it? Okay, so if you think you have a guess, what's the problem? Here.
The things that build the trains and stuff are too big to put in the small things.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So here's two of our robots, a flying one and a crawling one. And then here's kind of three normal metal mechanical parts you would find in something like a car, or even the chairs you guys are sitting on probably have some little screws holding them together, right? And those pieces are bigger than the robots. So you run into a problem if you're going to try and build a robot using screws and nuts and bolts like this. And then not just the materials you make them out of, but the tools you use to put them together. So here's the fly next to the tip of a hammer and the tip of a screwdriver. You can imagine what would happen if I used that hammer to try and put the fly together. Right? Squish goes the fly. Question?
Why don't you use robots? How do robots develop those kind of planes and stuff?
So for actually putting them together, that's something we're working on. The problem is, since nobody's built tiny robots yet, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. You don't have tiny robots to put the tiny robots together. So somewhere when you start out, you have to do it by hand, but in the long run, we would want robots to build the robots, because robots can do things more accurately than people can. Good question, though. Tools, this screwdriver is way too big. There's other problems like batteries. So this AA battery is pretty tiny, so I think there's probably one in this remote relative to your toy control cars or airplanes or something. But relative to this fly, it's huge. This poor little fly is never going to lift that enormous battery. So there's this whole bunch of problems we have to solve just on how we're actually going to build something that's small, but that doesn't even begin to solve how we're actually going to get it to move. So for a flying robot, the second question is, okay, fine, we can build something tiny. How are you going to get it to lift off the ground? And again, we think, okay, we're really good at building things that fly with propellers or jets. Why don't you just strap some tiny jets on your little robot and have it fly around? But same problem, you can't build really tiny jets. That plane is pretty big. You can't just take that and shrink it down to teeny tiny insect size. So that's where the engineers kind of have to swallow our pride and go to biologists and say, okay, we don't know how to make something this tiny fly. How do insects do it? And insects do it by flapping their wings, right? You guys have seen insects, not just insects, but larger things like birds fly. They flap their wings. Has anybody ever seen a little bug with a rocket engine on it? Not counting movies? No, right?
No.
So biologists study how real insects fly. This is a real bee, not a robotic bee. We're not that good. And it's kind of sitting there, staring at the camera, flapping its wings. This video is actually slowed down about 100 times, so you can see the wings moving. In real life, the bee would be flapping its wings back and forth so fast you can't see it. And it gets even cooler if we see what they want to do when they try to steer. So this is a video we took in our lab of a fly that's stuck in front of a computer screen. So the screen the fly is looking at is off the top of this video. We can't see it. And on that screen, there's going to be a little black blob that expands really rapidly. So from the fly's point of view, it thinks it's going towards something that's getting bigger and it's going to crash. So you'll see it kind of reaches up with its legs to brace itself and then uses this wing like a brake. It stops flapping it and flaps the other wing harder to try and spin around and turn away, but we have it stuck there so it can't. But don't worry, the fly was not harmed in the making of this video. So we can study videos like that to figure out how the flies are moving. We can actually, also biologists do dissections to see what the muscles are doing on the inside, how the muscles are making the wings move, and that lets us build robotic wings that do the same thing. So sorry, this video is kind of dark, but this is a pair of robotic wings that are flapping up and down, kind of like the bee's wings were in that first video. And what we do is put these wings on a little robotic body, and then we can actually make it lift off. So this next video goes kind of fast, so I'll play it twice. The fly is going to start off at the bottom of the screen and then take off at the top. But there's a couple fishy things about the video, so let's see if you can guess what they are. You have a guess?
Wires.
Right, which wires?
The railroad.
So yeah, there's these wires dangling off to the side, and then there's another kind of weird thing. Yes?
The two.
These things?
Yeah.
Right, so can you guys guess what those are for?
Holding it.
Sure. Raise your hand. Here?
I was gonna say.
Holding in place. So yeah, these guys keep it upright. Who has training wheels on their bike? Really? None of you guys have training wheels? The guy had training wheels until I was like 10. Do you guys just not have bikes, or you have bikes without training wheels?
I have bikes without training.
Okay, wow, you guys are 5 years ahead of me. Okay, so these two rails act like training wheels to keep the fly straight up and down and prevent it from crashing. Because one area where animals have a really big advantage over robots is that they have a sense of balance, right? You and I have a sense of balance where if you're walking along and you trip over something, you don't think to yourself in slow motion, oh no, I tripped, I need to stick my leg out and catch myself and stand back up, now I'm okay. Has anybody ever done that? Okay, I can't think that fast. I don't know if you guys can. Same thing with flying animals. If a fly is flying along and a gust of wind comes and blows it, it doesn't think to itself, oh no, I got blown over, I need to flap the wing harder and turn myself right side up again. It just kind of does it automatically. And robots don't do that unless we tell them to. We have to program in how to balance. So if we took those wires away and didn't tell the robot how to balance itself and turn it on, it would just crash. And that's actually what my PhD thesis is on. If I ever want to graduate, I have to figure out how to get the balance. Check back with me in a couple years to see how that goes. And I showed the picture of the battery earlier. So that's what these extra wires dangling off right here are pretty much acting just like an extension cord. See that cord in the wall over there? So I'm a mechanical engineer. The poor electrical engineer's problem is figuring out how to take that battery and shrink it down tiny enough to put it on so the fly can actually lift it up. So that's kind of where we are with the fly project now. Unless you guys have questions about that, then I'll move on to the crawling robots. Any questions about the fly? No? Okay. No? Sure.
What type of quote motor do you use?
So the little gray triangle looking thing on the fly here, it's called a piezoelectric material. In English, how many of you guys have touchscreen cell phones? If you're under 10, you say yes. Until I was 19. Okay, so there's some, not all touchscreen phones, but some have a material in the screen where if you press on it, it generates electricity. That's how it gets the signal into the phone. You can run that in reverse, take the same material, apply electricity, and the material will bend. So that little beam, gray thing is just a beam that's anchored at one end. You apply electricity to it, and it vibrates, and then the tip is connected to the wings. So I didn't have a good picture of this, but another problem is motors. You imagine just a picture similar to the battery where you have even a very tiny motor that you would find in a kid's toy or something is ridiculously large compared to flies. So a lot of our research is in materials you can use to cause motion of wings or legs or whatever that is something other than the motor, because motors are just too big. Sure. Question?
In the store, it seems kind of tiny.
So, yeah, you can get, I think, hearing aid batteries, or like little batteries that go in laser pointer pens and that kind of thing, are really tiny, but they're also pretty heavy. So that fly is deceptive because, it looks, I'll actually walk around and show you guys one at the end. It's maybe about this big, so you would think it's big enough to pick up one of those batteries, but it's also really, really, really light. So since those batteries are made out of metal, even though they're kind of tiny, they're too heavy for the fly to pick up.
Well, if you give it too much power,
Well, you can regulate how much power goes out at a given time. So even if you have a big energy supply, it's like if you eat a really big meal, so you have like lots of energy and you're full of carbohydrates or something, that doesn't mean if you go run, you're going to burn that all off right away, right? It means maybe you could go for a longer run or play for a couple hours or something, but it doesn't mean it's just going to all be gone like that. So same thing with the robot, you can put a battery on there, and then let's just say we had some imaginary tiny battery that the robot could actually lift. You would want to drain the battery slowly so you could fly around for 10 minutes or an hour or something, not just all be gone in a couple seconds. Sure. Any other questions? Sure.
Have you ever gotten one of the tiny robots to fly in?
So we actually, we just a couple weeks ago, and I'm not allowed to show videos of it yet because we haven't officially announced it. Got it, so I didn't tell you guys that, it's a secret. Got one we did the test where we lifted it off without these wires, keeping it up and down, and it kind of goes straight off the ground for about an inch, but then we don't have the battery on board, so once it gets too high, these wires kind of tug down one side. And since those wires aren't right in the middle, pretty much what happens is it lifts off for a little bit, and then the wires tug down one side, and it flips over and crashes on its head. It didn't break, though. We did it like 5 times, and it kept going. So, but no, we haven't actually gotten it to lift off and fly around and balance yet. Again, if I ever want to graduate, I need to get on that. Yeah. It's complicated.
How do you need power?
Sorry?
How much power do you need?
I think total power consumption is milliwatts. That order, I don't know the number off the top of my head.
So like, in terms of AA batteries, how much
In terms
power?
of battery?
Yeah.
So are you want a number of like amp hours or just?
Yeah, like can you power from a AA or?
A AA would be more than enough power, but it's much too heavy. You need something much lighter. I think with the best commercially available batteries that you can buy off the shelf right now, that maybe it would be able to lift off, the predicted flight time is something abysmal, like 16 seconds. Just because batteries have so much packaging and are so heavy that you're just wasting all your energy lifting the battery itself. So I think, optimistically, for a flight time of 10 minutes or something, battery technology still needs to get a lot better. Yeah. Your question, or are you just scratching your head?
Scratching his head.
So are the electrical guys working on the battery problem too?
Yeah. It's not just this gets into more technical detail, it's not just the batteries, it's also that the little gray piezoelectric material requires high voltage. Batteries only output around 3 volts, and that requires 200 volts, so you need the battery, and then you need the circuit to amplify that up to 200 volts, and the thing that does that right now is a 200-pound box that sits on a shelf, so it's taking that 200-pound box and making it this big. That is not exactly easy to do. So there's a handful of electrical engineering problems as well. That guy wants to graduate this summer, so. Alright, so any more? I'll take one more question about the fly and then keep going for the crawler, just so I don't keep you guys here all night. Sure.
So one of the batteries, is there any way possible to like shrink all that power into a tiny source, like 200 volts of power into that, like one?
So that's what, I don't know anywhere near as much about it, but you know how do you know about different kinds of batteries, like lead batteries and lithium-ion batteries? Like there's different chemicals that you can store energy in, and I think part of the problem with batteries is there's, like that AA battery, there's some chemical in the middle, but then it's surrounded by this big metal case, so I think what the battery guys are doing is looking at materials that can store just as much energy, but are lighter, so you can then make it smaller and store as much energy, but I don't know, there's like fancy names for the new materials, but I don't know them off the top of my head. But yes, that's the idea. Store just as much power in something tinier. Okay, so I'll talk about the crawling robots now. Kind of similar to the flying robots, what we do is study real insects that crawl. For example, this is a real cockroach running across this little grid. And if you're squeamish, some of the crawling robot videos are a little creepier, so you might have to cover your eyes. The cool thing about the cockroach here is it's kind of running along this grid with holes in it and not actually thinking about where it's placing its feet. So one of the problems with a lot of walking robots, kind of similar, like the balance thing I talked about with the flies, they look at the ground and they think about picking up and placing their foot each time. It's kind of this really jerky, slow motion where they have to think, I'm going to pick my leg up, this is how I'm going to move it, and I'm going to put my foot there, right? And we don't do that when we walk or run, neither do insects. You know, if you're running along, you might kind of look at the ground and make sure there's nothing you're going to trip over, but there's enough springiness in your legs that you can kind of bounce off of bumps and stuff and not trip. And insects do the same thing, so if we want to build a robot that can run really fast, that's how we've got to do it, because you don't have time to think about where you're going to put your foot each time. So The other graduate student who works on this does the same thing. He studies how cockroach legs move instead of how wings flap, and tries to build a robot that can move in the same way. So this next video loops, so don't worry, you'll see it more than once. There's a little cockroach robot, and it scurries across the screen. So see there's wires dangling off of this guy because there's the same problem. They're actually building a new generation of this robot that does have the batteries on board, because this way you're just resting on the ground. You don't actually have to fly, so you can carry more weight. So they're working on that. We also have the centipede robot. This video is kind of gross, so if you're squeamish, close your eyes, because some people will probably think it's cool. So if this is a centipede, don't worry, I don't think they have this kind in Cambridge. This is in the Amazon or something. Crawling around inside a cave, and you'll see in a second, see all those bats flying by? Okay, so if you guys had to put your money on a fight between a centipede and a bat, who do you think would win? Okay, hands for centipede. Hands for bat. Okay, it's usually about 50-50 until later in the video, and then people decide. So the centipede's kind of crawling along. And the cool thing, going back to the Bioinspired part, what are we getting from nature here, is that the centipede has a really long body with a bunch of different segments and different legs, so it can do different things with different parts of its body. Like right there, I went from crawling flat, kind of lifted the front of its body up to the wall, crawl up the wall, and bend around corners. In a second here, it'll get to the top of the cave and actually hang down, like use its rear legs to grip on and dangle down with the front of its body. So there's the bats. And centipede's going up to the top. This video is kind of long.
Is this going to fight? Is it going to fight?
Yeah. Give it away. So there, it's dangling down. Okay, now it's starting to move again. Okay, there we go. Now it's going to dangle down. And kind of hard to see, but what do you think it just did?
Grab the bat.
Yep. So who voted for the bat? Sorry, guys. So there it goes. Centipede gets a bat for dinner. So, tiny ones. I mean, it's either an enormous centipede or a tiny bat. Or both. So, this is the kind of centipede we can actually get in Cambridge. These guys are frequently fast. The graduate student who decided to build this robot actually got the idea after she caught one of these in her apartment. So she built a robot that could run that fast. So it's not quite that fast yet, and it doesn't eat bats. It does kind of twiddle along. So this one only has 6 legs. The newest one she's built, I think, has up to 20 legs, so it's about this long because she keeps adding segments to it. So that's it for the crawling robots. Actually, sorry, I've kind of biased this towards the flying robots since that's what I work on. But do you guys have any questions about the crawling guys, or want to see any of the videos again or anything?
No.
No? Okay. Boring.
Can we start with the centipedes and bats again?
That one's like 2 minutes long. So it goes to the ground after. See how
That was a good one.
Any other questions about the crawling guys? If not, next I'm going to talk about the squishy robots. Okay? Okay. Sounds like the general popular opinion is they're squishy robots. So, question. What do you think happens if I take one of my flies and step on it? Yes, bye-bye fly. It goes crunch, I get sad, and have to start over. So, I used to bring in spare flies, but it was getting pretty labor-intensive to build them just to let people step on them. So instead, you guys get this awesome picture of a boot stepping on a fly, and you can just imagine what would happen. So, the point is, it would go crunch, just like a real bug. This fly is made out of brittle materials. Do you guys know what brittle means? No? So if you think, like take a wooden pencil and bend it, it's kind of strong at first, but eventually it's just going to snap and break really quickly, as opposed to something like Play-Doh or Silly Putty, where if you take it and stretch it, it'll just keep stretching and won't break really suddenly. So the idea here is to build robots that are more like Play-Doh or Silly Putty, something you can step on that'll just go squish and won't break. And then, actually, I think the best analogy, or have you guys seen Monsters vs. Aliens?
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen it, but I saw the previews. You know Bob, like the blue blob guy? Okay, so we want to build a robot that's like Bob, right? Because he can squish through doors and around things or whatever else. I didn't see the movie, but I'm sure you guys know. There's tons of stuff he does because he's squishy. So does Bob ever do something like this, like go up to a door and squish under it? Yeah. Okay, there you go. So just pretend that's Bob, and we want to build a robot that can be Bob. Or maybe do something like have a bunch of long legs, kind of like an octopus, and then squish through a little crack in the wall. Something like that. And again, you know, nobody's really built robots or machines that can do this before. Robots are usually made out of hard stuff like steel and aluminum or carbon fibers. So the whole idea of how do you even build something, not necessarily tiny, but how do you build something squishy is totally new. So, as usual, we go to biologists and say, okay, how do squishy things in nature move? And the answer is with muscle, right? Your muscles are squishy. You can poke them and your whole arm doesn't shatter. That would be bad. But they can also move. So, can you guys still hear me? Okay. So we want to build something that can move and also be squishy, and we look at nature and say, okay, there's plenty of stuff that can do that. Like an elephant's trunk, right? An elephant's trunk doesn't have any bones in it. It can twirl around and do all sorts of stuff, pick things up. There's things in the ocean, like, I think this is a squid, but I'm not totally sure. Okay. It's got these fins on the side that are all wavy. Our favorite video, so this is an octopus trapped in a little glass box. You can see a person's hand there to give you an idea of how big it is, so it's not a huge octopus. And there's a little 1-inch diameter hole on the front of the box, so do you think the octopus can escape?
Yes.
Does anybody not think it can get out?
I think he can go.
So, you know, it makes sense that it can fit its legs through, right? Because individually the legs are smaller than the hole. But what about its head?
Yes. It'll shrink his head. Okay, how does he do that? He moves his muscles to the other side?
I think everything, it doesn't have any bones, right? An octopus doesn't have a skeleton, so it can just, even its brain can squish. So, that was pretty cool. As usual, we want to build a robot that can do the same thing. So, we can use squishy stuff like Play-Doh or Silly Putty. I think this is silicon rubber. It's something that starts out like a liquid you can pour into a mold and make a squishy robot. So, for starters, computer decided to freeze. Come on. Is that timing? Hold on. Video coming. Bear with me for 30 seconds. Technical difficulties. This worked earlier today. You weren't supposed to see that this farther ahead. Okay, here we go. Squishy robot. So, this robot is made out of the material I showed in the previous slide, and instead of applying electricity, this time these cables are pumping air into these little kind of balloon sacks so it can roll along like a tread. And if you took that, you know, I don't have one with me, but kicked it or stepped on it or something, it's made out of this squishy material, so it won't break. There's other stuff we can do also with electricity. This is kind of an inchworm robot. This doesn't actually move. It was just kind of what we call proof of concept in academia, which means it doesn't work, but we want to show people anyway.
Sounds like the software.
So it's coiled up, and then we apply electricity to it, and it can flatten out. So if you look at the top, you can see it starts out really short, and then kind of straightens out. And the idea would be that it's supposed to inch along like an inchworm, but this one didn't actually go anywhere. And then, let me see what's next. So there's other stretchy things besides materials that are actually gooey. You can have materials that are kind of hard but still stretch. Like if you guys ever played with a Chinese finger trap. So it's this paper or fibery material, but the whole thing can still actually stretch and contract. So here we have a robotic worm. It's got these wires wrapped around it that can contract like muscles. It's called muscle wire. And I bet you can guess what's going to happen. Do you think it's going to break?
Why would you do that?
Still really my first point.
No.
So the secret is there's inside that white mesh, there's actually a balloon filled with air, so that's what gives it that bounciness to bounce back out. So but you can keep getting it, and it'll just kind of keep chugging along. You know, it's not invincible. If you hit it with something sharp, you'd pop the balloon. But there's a certain, you know, and if you hit it really, really, really hard with the hammer, it would pop. But I think they're just not hitting it hard enough to break it. But it's still much better than the fly was doing. With the fly, all you would have to do is tap it lightly with the hammer, and it would break. So that's the point. We want something that isn't totally indestructible, but can take some abuse and get kicked around. Sure. Oh.
What's that? Why, like when you hit it with the hammer, the place where you hit it gets skinnier, and then at the other.
So there's a balloon inside, so when you hit it in one place, it's going to compress the balloon there and squish the air out. to the sides, and then I think, let me watch the video again. There's these wires wrapped around it, and those wires are contracting. So you see how right now it's getting skinnier and they're not hitting it with the hammer?
Yeah.
That's how it's moving forward. And then when you take it with the hammer and you hit it, it's just kind of smushing that part. I guess I don't have it in slow motion. It's kind of hard to see. So part of it's because of the hammer, and part of it's because the wires are contracted.
Okay, why don't you just cover it on the fly with, like,
So we get that question a lot too. Why don't you just make a squishy fly? The problem is the fly has to, well, there's a couple problems. So the squishy materials aren't as light. The fly has to be really, really lightweight to get off the ground. Squishy materials aren't as strong or as light. The second problem, the fly needs to flap its wings really, really, really fast, about 100 times a second. And with squishy materials, since they're kind of gooey, they want to gloop and move really slowly. Like you can imagine taking silly putty and trying to bend it back and forth 100 times a second. The silly putty is just going to want to kind of stretch quickly and then stretch slowly and squish slowly. It can't move that fast. So while it would be cool to have a squishy fly that you can flick and it wouldn't break, the materials can't do that. Not to say they never will be able to, but right now where we are with the materials, you can't build a squishy fly. Did I see another hand somewhere? No? Okay, so I have one more video of a different kind of robot. This is a shape-changing robot. So have you guys ever done origami?
yeah.
Okay, so you know you start out with a flat piece of paper and you fold it up into something cool like a little crane or flower shape, but paper itself isn't necessarily a stretchy or squishy material, right? If you just take a sheet of paper and pull on it, it's kind of hard. So what we did was build a sheet of robotic origami. This is going to start out as a flat sheet, and without somebody using their hands to fold it, it's going to fold up into a little boat shape.
By itself?
It will in a sec.
Okay.
Maybe. There, now does it kind of look like a boat? Sailboat. Better from standing back up. Okay, so now we're going to take that same sheet of paper, start flat, and fold it up into a paper airplane shape.
Can it fly?
Now, again, wait, did somebody ask, does it fly?
Yes.
So again, proof of concept, which means it looks cool but doesn't actually work. So the point was just to show that we can build a material that can change its shape, and then that was really early preliminary work. So ultimately, we want to use that to build a robot that can change its shape to actually do something useful and not just fold it to something pretty that doesn't actually fly or like a boat. So I think I saw your hand first, and then here.
Are there magnets on the paper, and the ones that you want them to hold are stronger, so the paper attracts to it?
So yes and no. There are magnets. You see, when it comes up, these little circles are magnets, but they're not actually what's starting the folding. They're just what's holding it in place. So if you kind of watch, it goes for a while and then snaps into place pretty quickly when the magnets get close enough. What's starting the folding is a metal material. It's actually the same stuff that those wires wrapped around the worm were made out of. When you apply electricity to the metal, it gets hot and then it contracts. So instead of having a wire that just shrinks this way, I think they have a little sheet that bends up at the creases. So when you have this little sheet of metal and you apply electricity to it, it gets hot and it folds up. I think they might be, so like right here. That's one of the little joints that when they apply electricity to it, it folds up. Does that make sense? Was there another question?
But are these and the caterpillar thing the same material?
The stuff that's making it move, yes, it's the same kind of metal. Like I was describing the ham, it's this metal that contracts when you heat it up. The structural material that the body's made out of is different. I think in, oh, let me go backwards. So in the worm robot, it really doesn't like come backwards when we go to videos. So this white stuff is just kind of a mesh, like a Chinese finger trap, and then there's the balloon inside, and then there's this wire wrapped around the outside. In the origami guy, I think it's just a plastic sheet. It might be glass fiber, I'm not sure, like kind of sheets, not glass like your drinking glasses in your kitchen, but a lot of tiny glass fibers that are woven together, so it's pretty strong. but it doesn't have this white mesh stuff in it. Did that answer your question? Okay, so PowerPoint's going to decide to freeze again, but that's actually all the videos I had, so I don't really have some spiffy closing or anything. I just hope you guys had fun, and if you have more questions or if you want to stick around, I did bring 2 of the robots with me. They have little lids on them, so as long as you promise not to open them and poke at them, I can pass them around. I have, and these don't actually do anything, they're just display models, but this way you can only see them up close. So I have one of the flies and an earlier version of the little cockroach guy. So I guess maybe I'll kind of start the fly here and the cockroach here, and you guys can kind of pass them around the 2 halves of the room and make sure everybody gets to see, and then just make sure I get them back at the end. And if you guys have more questions about any of the videos or being an engineer or why I'm doing this, any of that, I'd be happy to answer them if you want to get out of here because it's dinner time or something. You won't hurt my feelings. Yeah, I guess you guys want to...
Well, thank you guys.
You guys need to make like an official announcement or...
We're going to put out some snacks, so you can all grab some snacks and see the robots.
Yep.